My name is Iris, and I'm currently a mom to Hannah and a wife to Daniel, and we have a baby along the way. I'm also a operating room nurse, and I love just seeing all the gnarly surgeries at work every day.
My name's Sam. For those of you that care, I'm a type 8 on the Enneagram. I'm an ENTJ, passionate about winning. Currently, I am married to a lovely wife, and I am also an entrepreneur with a boba shop called Boba Shark.
My name is Frances. I'm a creative multi-hyphenate entrepreneur. I am newly married, and I am passionate about traveling, my dog Willow, and pruning my rose bushes right now.
Welcome to another episode of our unnamed podcast show. We're going to be continuing talking about dating today. So I think today's discussion is probably be more about application and just like real life situation. But I just want to ask, what do you guys think about platonic friends and that term of being platonic friends? Can a guy and girl ultimately be friends, or is there always going to be like some feelings behind it, if you will?
I say yes. I think just because like in our case we're all married, I don't think because we're married it's like, oh, I can't talk to girls anymore, then I shouldn't be here talking to the two of you. Mm-hmm. And I think at some point it got twisted that all interactions between a guy and a girl has to be like romantic or sexual in nature. And so I do think there are aspects that sure, maybe like it's not that like I'm not talking to Esther about certain things to like go over or like processing different things with her, but at the end of the day, everything that I talk about with other people, I'm okay with talking about my wife about. And I think once that happens, then there's no like shame or like I guess gray area of my friendships with other females. So that's why I say yes. And I think I don't know, I think maybe even growing up in church where it seems like there are a lot of parties that said no. So I was like, no, I'm going to prove that it's a yes.
Yeah.
And so maybe that's why I'm sticking with my answer. Yeah.
I think I have a similar take. I think they can be friends, platonic friends, but I think my only caveat is that they really cannot have any feelings for each other. Because I think sometimes people are like, oh yeah, like we're just friends, but there clearly is one person who's like, I have even a slight interest for that person. Then I think it makes it complicated because the more you hang out, those feelings start probably developing in proximity. I think you also bring up a good point in that, like, you know, once you're married, there's probably different set of boundaries, and I think boundaries is kind of what keeps the guy and girl, like why I would say yes to that, because I think if both people don't have like boundaries and like strict, like, you know, we're understood as friends at this point, and even like when you enter marriage, like, you know, I am a married person, so like there are boundaries where I will not talk about certain things with you that I only will say for my spouse, then I think yes, the answer is yes. But I think it's a little gray, I think, for me in terms of the caveats, in terms of boundaries and where you can cross those lines.
Yeah, I mean, I do think there are like specific cases, and again, it's not a one size fits all, but in general, I still think yes. What about you, Frances?
Yeah. No, I totally think so, because I think I naturally just have more guy friends than girls. I don't know what it is. Maybe I'm not like a girly kind of girl or a girl's girl, but I remember like I had this conversation with like an ex before, a long time ago actually, and they were like, oh, guys and girls can't be friends. It's just, there's no way. There's always going to be another interest. And I just thought, is that like really true? Because that's like really sad too, right?
Yeah.
That you can't like be friends with like the opposite sex. Like that's like without feelings. Like I think that's like not healthy. So, but my answer is also like a resounding yes, you can, or it's, you know, you can't be friends. So I guess like maybe the question is like when you do, because I do agree with what you said also, Iris, is that like a lot of times like when it's platonic, but what kind of gets into a gray area or danger area is when you lie to yourself and you're like, oh no, we're just platonic, but it's like inside you're like, oh no, like I actually have feelings, but I'm trying to mask it. So like in situations like that, like how do people know like if they want to move forward in like expressing their feelings in hopes of like maybe starting a relationship?
Do you want to take this or?
That's a hard one. I think there's like the aspect of understanding yourself and where you're at with those feelings, and then also understanding and respecting where the other person is at. I think, you know, this is probably all like why relationships are complicated, is because sometimes you don't know how to express things and then when to express things. Those are like two separate things, and I think navigating that is probably, I feel like, the grayest area. And I don't even know, I think it's very situational dependent. Depends on, you know, how real you are with your own emotions and how real they are with their emotions too. I don't know how to answer that question. What about you?
Well, I almost want to throw out this disclaimer first. Like, if you're in a committed relationship, if you're married, like, this isn't telling you to, like, go profess your feelings for someone else that is not your current significant other. But I do think there requires that, like, I guess church always loves to call it, like, the DTR.
Oh,
and
yes.
You just kind of...
I'm sorry, what is a DTR?
Defining the relationship.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yeah, so you just, like, instead
It's
of...
very serious.
Okay, I'm sorry.
People have to like pray over this like
Oh my
moment.
gosh.
Okay,
Sure.
Well, so, okay, because I think I had one where it was, like, very explicit, but it was weird because it was with a friend from work, and so she was dating, but it was, like, towards the beginning of our friendship, and I think we just, like, really clicked, and one day we just, like, okay, meta conversation, like, where does us hanging out and, like, chatting at this level lead to? And then so we're just like, okay, let's break it down. It's either we end up dating, we just stay really good friends, we don't become friends, we try to date and, like, break up, whatever. And then we just kind of, like, crossed out all of these scenarios, and we're like, and then we both agreed, okay, I think we're good with just being good friends. And then after that, like, just any potential, like, romantic interest is, like, out the window. But I don't think this is a case that works for every situation. I don't know. Like, I can't tell if it's just because both of us just happen to be in a place where we're both very aware of the possibilities of where our friendship was going or, like, could go, and we just decided to talk about it then and there. And so I think going back to what you were asking, Francis, where it just takes both parties to talk about it, because obviously if it's just one party that has the interest and they just keep holding on to it and never mentioning it, then it'll never become anything, obviously, unless they talk about it. But I think they also risk the fact of, oh, am I giving up this opportunity to, like, date this person, or am I just, you know, sitting here and just kind of losing it, and we'll just see how it goes, and hopefully it works out.
Yeah.
Can I ask for your example, like, did you like her, or did you have, like, did you wonder if you liked her?
No.
Or was there any, it was just like we got along. Okay.
Yeah, I think it was just like we got along really well, and I think because it just so happened that both of our specific jobs at the time required us to work late, so, like, we would just multitask. We're, like, doing our jobs, but then we're also chatting till, like, 9 p.m. at the office. And so I think it was, there was no romantic interest at all, but I think it just felt important for some reason for both of us, and we just happened to have the same prompting on one day, like, hey, just let's take a step back. What is the meta, like, potential of us hanging out like this? And it just worked out. So yeah, there was no romantic interest to begin with, but I think having that conversation squashed any potential of it as well.
I feel like that is so mature.
I was just gonna say something.
Have a conversation.
I was like, that is like maturity beyond, I think, most normal human beings, because I feel like, you guys were very aware of, like, your feelings, and then you were aware enough to have a conversation about it, you know. And I'm like, I think most people, including myself, just get stuck at, like, I'm still trying to figure out where my feelings are, and, like, being aware of that, you know. And, like, the fact that you guys were both honest with your own thing, I think that's also really hard. I mean, I think we kind of talked about this earlier about, like, you know, being honest about where we truly are with, like, you know, the other person. And I think sometimes even admitting to yourself that you do like this person, or you, like, don't like this person, is already a big hurdle in itself.
Yeah. Kind of going back to the what you guys were saying earlier about DTR, a new term I learned today. Do you feel like that there's a lot of emphasis placed on that, and, like, is that emphasis necessarily good, or does it deter from actual, like, chemistry in an organic manner?
I think there is a good aspect of it, because I've seen the other side. I think going college, right, like, I was in fraternity, and it's very much so, you see this guy and girl hang out a lot, and then every now and then, you know, if there's a deep conversation, like, guy to guy or, like, the girl to girl, it's like, hey, so what's up with you and so and so? And then the response is always, oh, you know, we're just talking. And I think coming from a church background, I'm like, wow, it would make a lot of sense if they just like DTR'd right now. But I don't think it's explicit to church, but it's definitely something I do see happen more in a church setting, where because like these two people that hang out a lot, they DTR'd, then now they can establish, oh, actually, yeah, I didn't even think about it to that point. Yeah, I think we are dating now. And so I think the good aspect of it is it progresses past the, oh, we're just talking phase, which I think just ends up being really childish. And because expectations aren't stated, someone always ends up getting hurt because one party thinks it's a more committed relationship than the other party does. But then I do agree on the flip side too, where in a church setting, I've seen it happen too much where it becomes almost paralyzing.
Right.
Because the pressure then comes like, okay, if I saw you, Francis, talking to someone, I'm just like, hey, did you two DTR? and it's like, wait, that was only your first coffee, but I'm already like, no, you need to tell everyone what it is. You need to put a label on it, or else you're gonna get hurt.
Yeah, no, actually the same thing. Well, actually, just backing up, the funny story is like there was this one park I remember that's like 10, 15 minutes from my house, and this was the DTR park. Like, everybody went to this park when they had a DTR, and there was like a DTR bench even, you know, like this is where you sat when you had a DTR. But that just reminds me of this whole like DTR culture thing that we have going on. But I think I really much agree with you, Sam. I think the fact that I think the good aspects is that it forces you to like be more serious and intentional with your relationships, because you're like, okay, I do have to define the relationship. Like, where am I with my feelings with this person? You know, where am I, or where's this person? And you just make it more clear. It forces you to talk out, like, and really like be aware of yourself and where you're at with everything. But I think I do agree with you. I mean, I can think of multiple situations in the past and experience where like people will be like, did you guys DTR yet? You know, like, you should DTR, you know, like you guys have been talking for a month. It's time to DTR the relationship, you know? And you're like, you just feel kind of like pressured because you're like, man, I don't think we're even there yet. Like, I don't even know. Like, I just got to kind of talking to this person, and now I feel like I have to like define, like, am I dating or am I not? Do I really like this person? Do I want to spend the rest of my life with this person? You're like, man, we just got to know each other. So I think there's like, two sides to it, and I think sometimes it is detrimental, but sometimes it is very helpful.
Definitely.
I think that that external pressure just ends up becoming so paralyzing because then all of a sudden, at least in the examples that I've seen and interacted with, the person being pressured by their friends to DTR is just like, okay, this is too much. Like, this I don't see a future in this relationship anymore. And I think the culture makes it so people can't even just enjoy what part of the process they're in, because they're always like pushing them to hit that next step or putting a label on whatever step there are. And so in this specific example, I do think it becomes detrimental, because more likely than not, then this fledgling relationship ends up just collapsing on itself.
Yeah. I mean, I think like relationships, like by nature, should be organic. And when there's like too much pressure, it makes you like think too much about it, and it makes you overthink, and then it makes you like become like, I don't know, sometimes it makes you do things you normally wouldn't do, or it could even, maybe it was a good thing, but there's just so much pressure and like light on it that you just like start backing off. So yeah. How interesting. DTR. Gosh.
There's even a park and a location for it.
I know. God. So on the flip side, like, you know, how do you know when to start a relationship? Like, if you're in a relationship, like, how do you guys think, like, if somebody was like, how do I know when to like end a relationship? What would be some of your telltale signs or things that people should be aware of when you know? I guess the real question is the relationship I'm in like either fulfilling or like healthy, right?
Yeah, I think there's an aspect to that. I know biblically it's always like, oh, you shouldn't date a non-Christian. And I think, at least in my example, my personal experience, it was more like, I don't think dating a non-Christian was bad for me. I think it was more later on when I'm thinking, okay, eternally, if this person is going to accept Christ, I'll never know if she's doing it because I'm pressuring her to accept Christ, or it's because like she's actually accepting Christ on her own volition. And I think that created a lot of pressure, and I'm like, I don't want to be responsible for that. So I do think there is an aspect where if these if there are like fundamental values that I think you are trying to make almost excuses for as the relationship progresses, that maybe at that point it's worth taking a step back to view, hey, is this like, at what point do I stop making excuses for these fundamental differences? And if you realize, like, actually, you know, it is a fundamental difference that we can't really fix right now, then probably time to end it.
Yeah. I mean, I think number one basic is, you know, you should end it if you feel like you're in an abusive relationship. You know, that person is tearing you down and making you feel small about yourself, or making you, like, you know, feel like you are not worthy of a person or a human being. I think that's number one sign, like, this is not a healthy relationship and you need to stop this relationship as soon as possible. I think easier said than done, of course. And I think, you know, I think another thing also is, I think the ultimate goal, I think, of dating is that you'll end up in a serious marriage relationship, you know. And I think if you both are projecting to go different ways, like in terms of life goals, you know, like in terms of, like, you know, what we call destiny in the Christian world, you know, then, or different callings, you know, as we call in the church world, I think then that's something that, you know, I think is very important to consider, because you guys, at the end of the day, your roadmap is going to look very different. And I think there's some people whose roadmaps may look different, but they have intersecting parts to it and they run in parallel with each other. But I think, you know, if you know, one person wants to stay in California because, you know, they're like really tied to this place for whatever reason, whether it be their job or career or calling, and the other person's like, man, like, no, I have a heart for, you know, missions overseas. Like, those are really different callings in life. And I think that's, you know, you really got to evaluate, are we going the same direction or not?
Yeah, I think to be able to evaluate, like, the goals, direction, I think that's, like, super important, because that's, like, kind of the speed in which you approach and treat life, you know. I think for me, like, I think I was actually in a very dysfunctional relationship for myself, you know. It doesn't matter, like, what he did. I could take like accountability for the parts that I, like, did not, like, do well enough. For example, like, I feel like one of the most important things for a healthy relationship is, like, just one simple question. If you ask yourself, can you 100% be yourself around this person? And in doing so, does the other person, like, accept you and love you for that? You know, because I think I was in a relationship where, like, it wasn't that way, but, like, I just kept trying to be the person that they wanted me to be. But in doing that, I actually, like, lost myself and became a shell of a person myself. And ultimately that ended up being, like, super unhealthy. But I think, like, if it was just, like, one easy thing, it's like, can you be yourself, and does that person honor you for the person that you are, like, truly and wholly?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's so good. And I think maybe even being on the opposite side, I found myself, you know, being in my past relationship, like, wanting to change that person and, like, wanting to make them do something for me to be happy, you know. And I was like, wait a minute, like, they need to get out of this relationship with me, you know, like that is not healthy for, you know, either of us to try to change essentially the other person or make them my project to becoming, like, you know, you truly need to just accept them for who they are. And, you know, there's always things like, yeah, later on in life they're going to change, and hopefully you challenge each other to improve. But, you know, who they are now, can you accept them for who they are and love them for who they are?
Yeah, I think both those are, like, really good gauges. And yeah, I think now hearing it verbalizing this, I'm like, yeah, that makes complete sense. Like, why don't people know this? Would have made life so much easier.
People can learn from our personal trial and errors. A lot of people often say that, you know, one of the successes to a good relationship is the foundation of a good friendship, right? And so in that theory, sometimes it's like, oh, you know, if you're good friends, like, you could be very good life partners or, like, lovers. Do you guys feel like if you were in that situation, do you think dating a friend would put a friendship at risk? And is that risk worth it?
I'm going to say 100% it puts it at risk. I think anytime you take any friendship or any relationship to the next level and it doesn't work out, you've already crossed certain relational lines that it's hard to take back. And I think I would very much agree that, yeah, you know, when you take that step from friends to more than friends, you are risking your friendship, because if it doesn't work out, it might not ever go back to the same way it was. But I think all that to say too, like, I mean, for example, like personally, like Daniel and I were friends before, and we went through our friendship trials where I'm like, I don't want to talk to you anymore, you're not my friend, and then we became friends again, and then now we're married. But I think it is important because I think in marriage there's so many aspects to the relationship, more than just romance, more than just like the romantic touchy-feely, like feel-good things. There's very like just real like chemistry. Do we have like things that we like to talk about together? Can we just like hang out and have a good time? Like, do we like to do certain things together? Whatever it is that consists of a friendship, I think those are much a big part of marriage and any healthy relationship. And I think if you do have that foundation, I think it can only add to that.
Yeah, I think it's always very short-sighted when I hear friends going, oh, but I don't want to put the friendship at risk. But it's like, if you truly like this person, then I think, or like have these deep feelings for this person, then it's worth taking the risk, because if it works out, then great. Like you two have been friends for so long. Clearly, I can see you two get along with whatever, let's say a sport or some hobby. And that's something that can last and take you way further down the road.
Yeah. I think some people, like, just like you say, get so caught up like, oh, our friendship is at stake, but they don't realize sometimes like the best things you need to take a risk for.
Yeah.
You need to take a step out and like, move things into action that you normally wouldn't. And if you always live in the what if, like, then you're actually, I don't know if you're going to get anywhere, right? And I think similarly to what you're saying, I think friendship is so important in like a foundation to marriage, and also I think in getting to know each other. I think for me and like Adam, I think the reason we ultimately ended up working out was because we were able to go through like that friendship phase, at least for me, because I know that he was chasing me this whole time. And I was like, no, you're not my person. But I think it was important for me personally because I'm somebody with a lot of walls, and I feel like when I've like gone out to go dating or whatever, like I'm always this like walled up person where it's like you can never like get to know me. So I think sometimes like there is a true benefit of like having like friendship as the foundation, because you already know they accept you, or like just like you said, there's common interests and things like that.
Yeah.
So if it was somebody like, I think we've all been there, right, where like we have friends who date, or friends who date in the same circle and doesn't work out, right? Like, and it affects like the whole friendship circle. So people like become like disengaged as friends. Like what are healthy ways to like combat that and kind of change that storyline?
I don't know about healthy ways. Like, I feel like all the examples I've been in is just people just split and you kind of just take sides. And yeah, because in my case, where like when I broke up with my college girlfriend, even some of my friends that are like from high school, I'm like, you're hanging out with her? Like, what are you doing? Like, we're like homies. Like, how can you do
betrayed
this?
me.
Yeah, you betrayed me. But that, I don't know. I think at the same time too, I found my group of friends that I was okay with, so it wasn't like super bad from my end. It's just there's the possessive side of me, which is like, man, I lost my friends to like my ex. But then on the flip side, I'm like, oh, I guess that just means she actually is a good person. She's a good person. So of course, good people want to hang out with good people. But I don't know. I think in church, sometimes it does get pretty messy, and people just, it becomes really personal for people that weren't even the ones in the relationship. Because I don't know if it's like a maturity aspect where people just start bad mouthing their ex, and other people are like, wow, I can't believe you did this to her, or you did that to him. So I think maybe one healthy way is just like knowing to not badmouth people, and it's just right at the end of the day, no one is perfect, but you throwing shade at this person just makes both of you look bad. It doesn't only make this other person look bad. But I think there is this need for people to feel justified in their hurt, or justified in the fact that they did break up, or maybe even to save face, saying like, I didn't mess up the relationship, it was all this person's fault. Here's the list of ABC to Z things that they did to me that hurt me, and this is why they're bad. And I think once the people that were in the relationship draw lines like that, like I think it's very hard for people in these intersecting circles to not pick sides because the lines are drawn.
Yeah. I think it's important, like you said, to also just remember that at the end of the day, maybe in a church setting, that we are eternally brothers and sisters in Christ. And I know they talk about this all the time in like dating workshops, but like to really exercise that, like this is the time to do it, because I think just maybe even having like just basic human respect for the other person, like no matter how much they hurt you, that I am going to choose to just respect them, and like, you know, this was our time to trial this out and it didn't work out, and that's okay, no matter, and you know, and processing your grief and your hurt with like a small group of people, but not having to make this like an affair of the entire community, you know. And I think there's probably healthier ways that we can learn to like process these emotions without having to like throw shade at the person or bad mouth about them to everybody as we're trying to process this. But I know it's hard. It's a hard process, and I think I want to acknowledge that it's not easy, and I think we're all probably trying to learn to be better at it.
Yeah, I mean, the temptation's always there, right? Like, even in a small group where it's like, oh, how are you doing? Oh, you want to know how I'm doing? Like, blah, blah, blah. And
how authentic can I be
yeah,
right now?
right? And then it's just, I think in these settings, it's just so easy to try to find even more avenues to quote unquote tell people how you're really doing. And it ends up actually not being about how you're doing. It's just how bad this other person is.
Yeah.
So maybe it's an examination of like where your heart is, like when you're giving comments. Because I think a lot of times people forget that other people are friends with like each other, right? So it's like you're almost like taking away that opportunity for them to like continue the friendship. And like, I think ultimately, I think if you ever cared about that person to begin with, you kind of protect certain things about the relationship that you had, no matter what injustice you feel about it, you know? And it's almost about like your personal integrity, like about the situation. So what are like some healthy ways that people can like either like, you know, process like breakups or like dealing with exes, or just healthy like boundaries for people to set for themselves in a relationship setting? I know that's 2 questions, but
I mean, I think it's also important, like if, you know, if 2 people in the same community date and things don't work out, I think it is important for them to, you know, maybe after, if you can't have the conversation initially because, you know, things are just too heated or too emotional, but to eventually like hopefully schedule a time where we like kind of debrief a little bit about how do we go back into the community as single individual people and not just as like a couple, you know, or somebody that broke up and is now awkward and won't talk to each other when we're with our friends, you know, and like learning how to kind of like approach the situation, and knowing how to like, how are we gonna talk about this together, you know, to the rest of the community. And I think sometimes making it about like, it's not just about us and our breakup, but it's about like us and like the rest of our community, like is probably also an important thing to just remember that like, you know, our relationship probably does affect everybody else, and our actions following this will affect everybody else. And how do we want to handle that?
Yeah, I think part of that too is it's sometimes, it almost sounds selfish to make it, like if I were in this position, to make it about me and think, oh, my relationship is so big that it affects the community around me. But it's like, in this case, it's true. And I don't think it's wrong to face that reality and also, in a sense, take responsibility for it. And of course, I think the example I mentioned is probably like about as toxic of a breakup as can happen, right? But even if that happens, I do think it is important to have that conversation. And if it's just so hard to even have it post breakup, then even find a mediator for it. Because, right, it always sucks when I see couples break up and one of them ends up leaving this church to go to another church because they just couldn't find a way to, I guess, return to normalcy. But it's also, I think, there's a part of it where the self-awareness comes in that, hey, you two decided to try this out. It didn't work.
Yeah.
And I think owning up to that is probably a big part of it too, because sometimes if people just can't grapple with the fact that this relationship failed, then I think they just assume that everyone else is judging them and saying like, oh, you're a failure. But I don't think that's true. But for some reason, they apply this pressure on them, and out of that pressure and this like doubt, hate, whatever, it becomes, they have to lash out somewhere. And I think that's where, again, right, like the conversations are always healthy, and if we try to keep it within a select few and like a trusted few and have someone mediate and just kind of be helping us process and just go over tangible things we can do, then this like toxic breakup scenario that I alluded to doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think actually very much like as friends of these people, you know, like I think it's important for all us to also build a healthy culture or like, you know, discipline of like, you know, when people fail and their relationships don't work out, that we don't like further like make it more awkward for them or like, you know, start gossiping or start talking about like, oh, did you hear how they broke up and like all the bad things about this relationship? Because I think it just makes it even more intimidating for the next couple to like want to like try to reintegrate and like try to be better about things. And so yeah, I think it's a two-part thing. It's on the couple, but it's also on like the friends and the community and the rest of the church to be supportive and like be okay with people trying to date and not working out, you know, and like making it a safe space for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely awkward conversations after awkward conversations.
Totally.
But I do think it ends up working out if people are willing to have them.
Yeah.
But, you know, sometimes it might, right, like you said, takes a friend to bring the broken couple together to have that conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's so interesting how you guys touched on that. Sometimes a relationship failing to somebody actually makes them feel shameful about themselves. But
Yeah.
I think actually if a relationship doesn't work out, it's actually quite liberating because that just means that you're with the wrong person, you know? So, and you're going to find the right one later on. So,
Yeah. But I think just back to it, there is just that pressure that like, oh, I can't admit that I messed up. I can't admit that I made the wrong choice, and maybe even the whole like foot in the door phenomenon where you're thinking, oh, but I spent X amount of time with this person and all of that has gone to waste. But I think what you said, Francis, is the mature way to look at it, where you're looking back and you're like, well, this just reinforces like what I'm not looking for. It reinforces what I am looking for. And I think, right, I know it's hard because your emotions are part of you, but once you take a step back from those like sad, negative emotions that come right in the beginning, I think people are able to get that clarity.
Yeah. And I think just to even take a step back too, I think it's like important to just acknowledge the sadness of the situation sometimes when people break up, and to acknowledge your own feelings. Like if you're hurt, like acknowledge those feelings, because I think the more you don't acknowledge them, it's going to come out in one way or another.
You're going to explode.
You're going to explode. And, you know, when you explode, it might just not look pretty for more people.
Right.
And so I think it's important that, like, you know, if you were in a relationship at church or any group and it doesn't work out, like, you need to acknowledge that you were hurt and, like, talk to your friends and, like, cry or, like, you know, vent or whatever you need to do, because you're human at the end of the day, and those were real emotions that you invested and real time that you invested, and you know, those are things that are like healthy ways to grieve and like to talk about these things.
Yeah, I think grieving is so important, but I think what's also important is knowing when to not necessarily to stop grieving, but when to stop holding on to that grief. Because like, I don't know how it, like, you guys, I've had friends where I'm like, dude, like, it's okay that you're still like upset about it, but if you keep talking about it, like, dude, you're dragging everybody down. You know, so at one point you have to let it go for yourself, you know, and just move on.
Yeah.
I think one thing like Esther and I have been talking about lately is there's people that just hold on to the past really strongly, and then that prevents them from like looking into the future and kind of seeing the good. But then the flip side is there's people that only look to the future and they don't hold on to anything from the past. But it's always hard to like find that good balance, because I think if you keep holding on to the past and you're like, this incident shaped me and this is why I am who I am, it doesn't give you the opportunity to grow from that.
Right.
But then, of course, right, the flip side, you're just like, oh, I'm just living life, whatever, none of this matters, like, I'm good. Then you don't have these reflective moments that you grow from. And in that case, you probably can't even reflect from this relationship and what you're learning from it. And it just ends up being really tough. But I hope just as people mature, like, they're able to kind of grasp and balance between the two. But it's not easy. Not easy.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts about all of these subjects. We love talking about dating, and I know that there's many of you that may have questions about it. So if you want to explore this topic more, anything that you have in terms of questions or just things you want to just us to talk about or think about, just make sure to let us know. We'd be happy to talk about it. Thanks so much for joining us this week.